All right, 2019, well, it's been a big year for federal politics. We're seeing the first full year of a Morrison government, as well as the PM's unexpected re-election in May. Since returning to government, the coalition has passed a number of key legislative changes, including tax cuts and, of course, the repeal of the Medevac changes. On a small number of other bills, the numbers have fallen short. Now, following his defeat, Bill Shorten stepped down as opposition leader after failing to win office at 2 election contests. Anthony Albanese, as we know, took on the reins of the Labor Party. As a man from Labor's left, Albanese's challenge remains to reorientate his political sympathies and that of his party's policies towards the centre, and to appeal to Middle Australia, who I might remind some commentators who continually want to write off the Conservative side of politics, that's where most Australians are, election after election. Indeed, it's worth noting this sober statistic. Over the past 9 federal elections, Labor has only won a majority once. It wasn't a majority in 2010, it was a hung parliament. That majority was 2007, when Kevin, I'm here from Queensland and I'm here to help, pitched himself as an economic conservative who wouldn't touch John Howard's border protection policies. We all know what happened next. But beyond Canberra, this has been a big year too, a tough year for our rural and regional communities. Our farmers have faced some of the toughest drought conditions the country's seen in generations. Water, well, it's re-emerged as a political point, a very potent political issue. And of course, the bushfires, it's an issue as well that have become more and more politically charged. Joining me now to discuss the year that's been in Australian politics, Sky News reporter Annelise Nielsen from our Canberra studios. Annelise, I want to just touch on a couple of things before we get to just some assessments from the parliamentary sphere, which is where you are based in Canberra. What did you make of these protests today and this continuing firestorm? Sorry to use that word on a day like this with bushfires, but the internal political machinations about should the PM be on leave or not on leave, and that protest at Kirribilli House.
It is one of those really interesting stories, and it has gotten a lot of airtime in the fact it is the end of year, and I think a lot of people are just fed up and ready to go out the door. So many of the Labor ones were telling us that they couldn't wait. They were crawling to the finish line to get out of here. As far as it goes look, it's hard to explain to a lot of people that we are in a workplace like any other workplace, even though we are in one of the most privileged places in the country. But the Prime Minister does take holidays, and he hasn't taken one since he became Prime Minister. We were given some warning just a day or two in advance that he was going away for a few days with his family. We were explained that it's his 30th wedding anniversary with his wife Jenny next month, and they've had to cancel the trip for that so they could go to India, because that was the only time that the Indian delegation could meet with him. That's a really important bilateral agreement that they're trying to negotiate. He's apparently not taking time off in between Christmas and New Year as well, that there's going to be some important work then. So the argument was that, well, he's got to take some time off, it'll be now. It's hard when it is with these bushfires, and the place this has really taken off has been Twitter. There's been a few handles, hashtags that have really driven this conversation, and so today was probably the first time we've actually seen it translate into the general public, people, living beings outside Kirribilli House making their voices felt. A lot of the stories we've seen around criticising the PM for taking holidays haven't actually had anyone putting their name to it, and even Anthony Albanese has been obliquely saying, look, the PM's missing in action, kind of referring to the fact he's on holidays, but not many pollies actually want to put their neck out and say he shouldn't be on leave. Yeah,
and can I just jump in there too? In terms of division of responsibilities, if it was a very serious terror attack, let's say, I would expect that the Prime Minister was there, that he would indeed cancel his holidays, because a lot of the apparatus in relation to a terror attack are federal apparatus, ASIO and other intelligence services. But this is bushfires, and the biggest player in a bushfire, aside from the Volunteer Fire Brigade Commissioner, is very clearly the Premier. The Premiers have carriage right across the country in each state and territory, Chief Ministers obviously in the 2 other places, but this is their bailiwick, and the PM's there to provide support, assistance and guidance if required, but it is the job of Premiers. So I think there's a lot of people wanting to cause political havoc for the PM going into Christmas, and I'm not surprised Anthony Albanese has walked away from criticising the PM today. Let's just look broadly at the year. Legislatively wise, I mean, the government had the election in May, came back. it's got a fractious parliament. It doesn't have a majority in the upper house, but it has, and it's got a narrow majority in the lower house, let's not forget. But it has moved on. It's got bills passed. It's certainly got those tax cuts, which will be important in a sort of stimulus sense. And it's also put money out there for infrastructure, and it's got Medivac repealed. That's a pretty good little chit going into Christmas.
It has been a pretty good few months for the government. It is really interesting this time in between the election, as you're saying about what the numbers lie in the House, but more importantly the Senate. This 6 months really has been getting to know the crossbench. They are so critical, and there's just about 4 of them that actually really get to block any kind of government action. This has been the time when I think they've really been feeling out about what they want, making their really strong connections in government and that negotiating, and we saw that really fall down with ensuring integrity. That was flexing of the muscles, you might say, and that's going to be, I think, more settled going forward. But Medivac being repealed, that was such a huge moment for the government because it came just 1 year on from that slipping through Parliament, and that was seen as really embarrassing at the time. I'm still a bit sceptical that that was actually a hit for the government. It seemed like it really played into their hands because then they got to say for the next 6 months, if you vote for Labor, you need to be scared about your border security, and that played into an issue that the coalition's traditionally been much stronger on than Labor. And so that's something where, look, they lose the numbers here. We're all watching because we all watch Parliament closely, but when it peters out into the general public, that's not necessarily been a huge win for them, but it certainly was when they passed it through just before just at the end of the last sitting fortnight.
Yeah, look, I have to say I agree with you on that point. It's a bit like Trump in the impeachment. All the left insiders are, thinking that this is going to be a winner for the Democrats. It gives Trump, in my view, a reminder to his people of a reason to vote for him. He's got to turn out the vote, obviously, and it's grievance politics back at a time when he really needs his people to be angry. Just like for the coalition, borders had slipped away as an issue. I know polling, when Abbott was leader and the boats had stopped, it certainly wasn't front of mind. Along comes Medivac. It was an own goal, I think, by Labor this time last year, and it gave the coalition a grievance to put the issue back on the table for voters, and I think it certainly helped them in the results we saw, particularly in places like Queensland, where we know it's a potent issue. Just before we go, Christmas time is sort of the time you'd expect reshuffles. We know it could well occur in February when the Parliament returns. Now, bearing in mind the government has only been formed and its ministry set since May, but we do know that David Coleman has requested personal leave. We don't know what that's about, and we're not sure entirely if he will return. One of the criticisms when I speak to people around the political Canberra world is the underperformance of ministers, and that's been, I think, some of the damaging critique levelled at the PM. I think he's strong, but not everyone in his team is strong. Do we think we're going to see a reshuffle anytime soon?
Look, the big indicator that there will be a reshuffle has been this consolidation of the public service departments. Now, that was another story that probably didn't make waves right around the country, but we were all watching very closely because it does give an indication that if they're consolidating these public service departments, they're going to be consolidating the ministers as well, because there's a few now where there's 2 ministers in charge of each portfolio. You're absolutely right. Some have more stepped up to the challenge than others, and there has been some concern about the performance of a few. Without naming names, it does seem like I'd put my money on a reshuffle before the middle of next year, Peter.
Yeah, I think it'll be either into the May budget or just after. Annelise, thanks for all your contributions this year. It's been fantastic to get your eyes and ears around Canberra onto this show each night at 6. Thanks very much for your time tonight, and have a lovely Christmas.
Always a privilege. Thank you, Peter.